So welcome to this episode of the Author's Spotlight, where we're going to discover the highs, the lows, and the lessons learned from a successfully published author. And as always, this show is sponsored by Librotas. So if you want any information or you want to know anything more about how to turn your book writing dreams into reality, then please do stay tuned. Without any further ado, we have a wonderful guest with us today. We have Saar, who's telling us all about his new book. So welcome to the show, Saar. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Great to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
Now, your book launch, is it officially launching? Is it this week?
It is officially launched as of early this morning. I started receiving these wonderful warm messages at about 5 in the morning. So clearly,
Lovely.
Amazon has its own time zone, but as of very early this morning, it's live.
Fabulous, fabulous. So we hopefully we can add this video. We have someone live with us, so as well, if you've got any questions for Saar, please do leave them in the chat box. It's always reassuring as we're going through it. But how great that we're here live with you as you actually do the launch. My apologies for not remembering that it was today. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what your book is about. What are people going to get when they get this book?
Sure. That's a couple of questions rolled into one. So I guess in terms of background, what I always kind of remind myself is the story of this book has been with me, I think, for probably the better part of 2 decades. Since I can remember, I've loved challenging, sometimes in subtle ways, sometimes in less subtle ways. I had to learn the more tactful, the more productive ways of challenging. But I've always loved connecting what is supposedly unrelated ideas. And I've had a fortune of meeting some incredible individuals who saw that ability in me, who saw the potential and have brought me into contact with other challengers, right from the Dean of the Commerce faculty at the university where I studied, the University of Cape Town here in beautiful South Africa, right up to a whole number of mentors and coaches throughout my career. And the idea that challenging is actually inherent in our nature, that it's in our DNA, in fact, and it's our environment that helps us either to switch on these genes or that switches them off and makes us anything but a challenger, although in our essence we really are, is really the idea of this book. And I'm really hoping that the readers of this book might find themselves in one of the 18 chapters, might see themselves in one of the stories that we outlay, right from social ecosystems to kind of the heart and soul of infrastructure, heavy industry, and anything in between, digital ecosystems and networks. I hope that our readers find themselves in some shape or form and say, I think in some shape or form, he's talking about me. And that's really my wish for those who venture out.
And reading sort of between the lines of what you're saying there, I think what I'm inferring is that there's probably people there who love challenging, and there may be some ideas of how to do it more subtly and perhaps be more impactful. And there may be other people that are not good at challenge or being challenged, that there's going to be insights for them, or is that not the case?
No, it's a great question. I believe it's for both, because we all have instances in our lives where we challenged poorly, or where we didn't challenge and kind of remembered the moment. It stayed with us. So we said, I should have said something. I had the idea. I should have stepped in. I should have gone all in. So we all have these moments. It's part of the human experience.
Definitely.
And while the book is very much focused on the world of work and commerce and industry, the examples there go way beyond that into our personal lives. In fact, I struggle to, when I speak to challengers, and we interviewed quite a few of them as part of the study that led to the book and actual book writing, I struggle often to kind of delineate that line between their personal lives and their professional lives, because they challenge in both. And they just become better at it, whichever the avenue or the playing ground within which they choose to challenge.
Yeah, well, that word alone, challenge or challengers, I think it's going to spark some interest. It's woken something up inside of me. I would say to you that someone that doesn't like to challenge the status quo, very much about keeping the equilibrium. And I've often, with all the digital world, where you hear these sort of 90-day challenges, 7-day challenges, I know it's a word that I'm like, sometimes I'm really up for it, like really intensively working for something. And other times I'm like, I just could do with an easier route. So I am very, very keen to find out more about your book as well. Let's just pop it up here, the title, so that people can actually see it. So the full title of the book is Challenges: How a New Breed of Leaders Collaborates and Wins in a Hyper-Competitive World, by Saar Ben Attar. So if you're interested in that book, you can get that today on the book launch, live now on Amazon. So please do check it out. And while we find out a bit more about the book with Ben today. So you said you did a bit of research, you've interviewed a lot of challengers, and that's how this book has come about. So becoming an author for you has been like what?
Wow. If I had to put it into words, mind-opening. It really challenged me at a mindset level. It's easy to say, look, I head up a consulting organization, and we do a lot of work with challenges in the normal course of our work. So we would have thought perhaps this would be easy, right? You phone your clients, you phone people who are on your network, and you have the conversation that you usually have with them. And that's true. And that might be the 90%, but the 10% that got us to in the conversation. And I remember distinctly with each interview we had, there was that moment where we kind of ventured beyond, where we had to let go of that old mindset that says, okay, right, until here, that's the kind of safe space within which we could talk about the safe challenges we set for ourselves. And people started sharing with me the extraordinary challenges that they've taken on, and the real meaning and impact it had on their own lives and the people around them. And that made me challenge my own mindset when I go into these interviews. And that perhaps is the most rewarding part of this. You grow and you learn as part of the process. And the same for the people who interacted with us. And there's so many of them who've been so generous with us, with their time, with their ideas, with sharing, I think, a part of them, not just a part of their work or their role or their title, during the kind of year and a half, I guess, that it took to formally write the book. I'm always conscious I've been informally writing this probably for the better part of 20 years.
Yes,
but the formal part,
it's ticking away in the back, isn't it, before it becomes actual reality on pages.
Exactly.
It's so important, I think, that for authors that are watching the broadcast today, is that writing a book does grow us. And it's not always comfortable. It is, and for some people, it is a real challenge, isn't it? Too, for lots of different reasons.
Absolutely.
And you're talking about when you listen to your client stories and you reiterate and you go back through it. Of course, things become consciously more aware to you, don't they, than they were when they were sitting, as you say, writing the book in your back of your mind for 20 years. It's a real reality check of what you're saying and what you're thinking and believing. So is there anything else about that mind opening and that challenging for you when it becoming a book? I'll put my teeth back in. One of my things, I need to come out for air probably today and breathe. Becoming an author.
Look, I mean, the one thing that's really struck me is that that mindset shift is available to all of us. It is not something that's unique. It's a muscle that we practice. And some of it perhaps have been fortunate to practice it on a daily basis. And some of us come across it in moments of crisis or moments of reflection, quiet reflection. But whatever is that moment that led you to challenge, it led you to question old ways of doing things. That's really where it starts. It's, we think about challenging as this unique, almost hero-like syndrome that kind of hits us with a bolt of lightning and dramatic music in the background. That's Hollywood style. The reality is that people begin their challenger journeys in the most subtle of ways, in a question that's being posed to them, or they pose to themselves, and they just can't answer it well at that moment. Or just with that smile where you kind of realize, hang on, that's not the only answer that exists. So for me, it's there's such diversity in the realm or the population of challenges out there, and equally there's a diversity in the many moments that lead us to challenge. You don't have to look for the dramatic music, for the spectacular failure that led you to leave your job and do something else. I've come across amazing challenges who haven't changed their role, whose essence of their work did not materially change. What changed was the impact. What changed was first and foremost their mindset, their outlook at what their role is really about and the
Yeah.
deeper meaning of it. And that led them to start to collaborate with others. And I'm sure during today's conversation, we're going to talk about collaboration and the role that these broader ecosystems play in becoming effective challenges in today's world, that is.
That kind of brings me on to the next question. So why did you write this book?
So I guess there were, when I started off, the title that myself and Karen gave to the book when we started off that kind of book structuring workshop, and I still remember I took a weekend off, went out to nature, what we'll called in South Africa the bush, the beautiful kind of immersive nature that you can literally disappear in. Stayed at a wonderful resort. It was very quiet. I was literally the only one there. And I remember we had a whole day workshop done online. And the initial title we gave the book was Ecosystem Moves. And I remember the concept of ecosystem has fascinated me for many, many years, because it's really the architecture within which we find opportunities, within which we can grow new ventures, new businesses, new social enterprises. And I went back right to the original works of James Moore, who wrote The Death of Competition, for example, right back in 1998. He saw this coming, almost 30 years ago. And some incredible individuals who've kind of since written and built the knowledge base that we now fortunately have about this changing environments that we now operate in.
Mm-hmm.
But the word challenges kind of evaded me for a while. It was kind of one of these words where I kind of went, do I really want to venture there? Do I really want to kind of say it? Or could I kind of talk more clinically at the changing world of ecosystems and the way in which information, ideas, methods of execution, new habits and practices flow through them, through entrepreneurial networks, through many collaborations? And that would be a safe way to just call it something about ecosystems. The problem, of course, was that I found out that before me there were, and I stopped at the count of 24. I ended up with 24 books, marvelous books, great books. I've still got the list. That they've all were written about business ecosystems, right from James Moore's original piece to very recent editions. And they're all wonderful in their own way. But it struck me that all of these great works talk about what ecosystems are. They talk kind of in the third language about the role of challenges, but they don't name it. And they don't kind of lead with a practitioner's mind. They don't talk from, I was there, I built, I did, here's what I faced, here are the decisions that I had to, or the challenges I had to overcome, here's the decisions I needed to make, here's the risk I had to assess, both for doing nothing, which is always an option, very often not a great option, but it is an option that's out there. Do nothing different, just keep reflecting, looking at, count the signals that are coming towards us, and there are many of them in every industry we work in and have the fortune of interacting with CEOs and leaders in. Or we can do something different. And what I found through this process is the practitioner's book hasn't been written yet. So only much later in the process, I kind of turned to Karen, and I think she nudged me also in a way, in a very kind of subtle British way, to say, well, should we relook the title of the book? And at the end, I kind of said, well, hell with it. Let's call it what it really is, which is the personal and the professional journeys of the people who actually build those new ecosystems, the people who venture out and seize those new opportunities and realize that none of us, however capable, however well rewarded, awarded, recognized our organizations are, we cannot do it on our own. And that's a very humbling moment to get to, that moment when you realize, despite all of the capabilities, the resources, the budgets, the good ideas, the great teams around me, we can't pull this off on our own.
No.
Whether we are a financial institution looking at open banking and looking at the next big venture that we are considering, whether we're an energy company and really need to step into the midst of the energy transition, which is far bigger than I think most people realize. And it's much more digital and technology driven than most of
Yeah.
us realize. We kind of think of solar panels and wind farms, and this is way, way beyond that. Whether you're in healthcare, and how the essence of healthcare, the way it gets uh, delivered, and from initial diagnosis to healing that comes afterwards, all of these things fundamentally are changing right in front of our eyes. And those are the challenges that we seized on and picked up in our book and said, you are actually writing the story. And you might be in the midst of that story, by the way. None of them, I think, could write, and the book ends here. All of them are still saying, I've got so much more to build.
Yeah.
Whether they are, corporate innovators, whether they are startup owners, whether they are funders of these organizations and new ventures, whether they are management innovators, people in academia that are literally rewriting how we would manage and lead organizations in this century. All of those became willing participants in this book writing exercise. And I couldn't but just call it challenges, because then I think I would be doing a disservice to them. Then I would be essentially saying, well, it's only about the big idea. It's actually not about the individuals. And this book is really about the individuals, and many of them. And I couldn't even in the acknowledgement section pay service to all of them, or many more that touched us in some shape or form, that gave us from their ideas and experiences of challenging. But that's really what the essence was. So I think at the end it became the right title. And sorry, Karen, if I have to say, kind of 6 months later, I got it. So the title had to change.
Well, but I think that's a really valid point about the collaboration, though, isn't it? I think sometimes when we know things got to change, or we hear a message, it just takes our own internal system time to adjust to do that. Some things you're forced to change instantly because the environment, there is nothing else you can do about it. But when you have started writing with a working title, and you start to see the obvious, I think it's sometimes easier for somebody outside of us, like Karen, to see and hear what we might be missing. But it still takes our system time to update to that. The question I want to ask you, though, is what's been the most important lesson that you've learned as a result of writing this book?
I think there were a few lessons, but kind of one that really strikes me is that I guess two things. Firstly is the magnitude and scale of impact that challenges and the ecosystems that they are building, collaborating in, bringing into life already has. There was a fascinating study by McKinsey done, I think it was in the middle of last year, where they had to put a number to it. And they said, the ecosystem economy is going to be worth something in the order of $80 trillion over the next few decades. They couldn't put a timeline to it. So they said the next few decades. Even if you put it at an annual average figure, we're still in the trillions. And that kind of puts a figure just to the monetary value that gets generated through these new moves, to these challenger moves. But that's just kind of one half of the story. The other half of the story is the impact beyond what sits in the accounting lines. The value of learning, the value of agility, that people are now being able to navigate much more productively these uncertain times. And you can't account yet for the future ventures, business or otherwise, that they will come up with. That's not in the McKinsey study. That's over and above the 80 trillion. So and then the social impact that has, how do you quantify the value that it has on the well-being and longevity of people who now benefit from better healthcare? How do you put a value to, having clean energy and the impact that has on the battle against climate change, man-made climate change? All of these, when you put these together, I think you get to staggering numbers. However you decide to measure the kind of the future value of what challenges are currently already engaged in and will continue to over the next few decades. So that's kind of the one kind of area that really comes to mind. The second one for me is, I think, Sheryl, you've said it really nicely, is that challenging is a process that happens not just when it's fully visible to us. So if I kind of zoom in, if I now spoke about the macro level, but if I now zoom in into the micro level, what happens to us? What happens to our families? What happens to the people around us who witness this act of challenging? And I'm conscious many of these acts of challenging take sometimes years. There are years in the making. So what I found is that sometimes in these quiet moments, in the periods in which supposedly you're doing nothing, you're not challenging, you are somehow sitting on the fence. I would want to challenge you, Sheryl, that in those moments, in fact, you're not sitting on the fence. You are simply not aware of how your challenger DNA gets activated. You know, when we talk, if I can use a biological analogy, when we switch on certain genes using our epigenome, what happens is the body starts making new proteins. In fact, I think by last count, I think we can now test for about 2,300 new proteins that are essential for our physical well-being. You can't physically notice, certainly not by direct measurement at the moment, of how or to what degree those new proteins are being produced. They're being produced because your body is wiser than you. Your body is now activating a new ecosystem that then it unleashes onto your cells, and the result is well-being, energy production, mental clarity, ultimately resulting in longevity and better quality of life.
Yeah.
But at that moment, of that quiet moment when you're sleeping and your epigenome kind of keeps on switching new genes on, that for me is where a lot of the magic of the act of challenging actually takes place. If I could use an analogy from the business world, that the best quote I can give you is actually by the co-founder of Endeavor, and she's written a wonderful book called Crazy is a Compliment. I actually make reference to it in my book, and she talks about the 8 years within which, and she and her team have been being funding and supporting and mentoring hundreds of organization entrepreneurial networks, in fact. And she speaks about the 8 years in which others don't get it. You are challenging, you are creating the new, you are asking great questions of why the current paradigm that was in itself was an act of challenging maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago. During those 8 years where other people first ignore you, then they dismiss you, then they get very angry with you, then they try to fight you, at the end they say you're a genius. In those 8 years, until it becomes obvious that this is now part of the official hype cycle, and yes, there are dangers in that cycle as well once it's become visible, that on average is a process that takes about 8 years. And we've tested that in a number of countries. And the answer also goes back to somewhere between about 6.5, 7, and about 12 years. So that 8-year estimate is pretty much on the money. Now, during that process, others simply can't see what you're seeing. However well you articulate it, you'll always have a small collection of co-challengers who work with you. They might have very boring titles in corporate environments. They might be not seen as, in fact, as non-challengers by others. But in that specific aspect, that set of paradigms that you've decided to challenge, where you see the value, they are your co-conspirators. And those are the individuals that see it before the 8 years are out. Now, if you're able to recognize that, be part of it, invest in it, in fact, and we speak often, not just to entrepreneurs and corporate innovators, we speak to venture capital funds, we speak to private equity firms, we speak to family offices and wealth functions within larger institutions. If you're able to spot that and participate in it in whatever form, debt, equity, sweat capital, giving of your generous time and ideas and being a mentor to others, whatever form that challenging, that contribution takes place, you're making a tremendous contribution. And the upside value of that is absolutely tremendous.
Yeah.
That's often what doesn't get measured. That's even where McKinsey, I think, are probably on the lower end of what is the value of the ecosystem economy, because it's an economy of 1 + 1 = 4 or 5 or 6. It's not even 1 + 1 = 3. That's direct bilateral collaboration. When we start to look at multiple value streams, multiple collaborations, where autonomous teams can make their own decisions and accelerate this
Yeah.
process, those 8 years could unleash enormous innovations. And we've seen it firsthand, and we've measured that on a case-by-case basis in
Yeah.
multiple ecosystems. So, I mean, I know we can talk about it for ages,
No,
but
you can just hear it. And I guess the question was, what's the lesson you've learned? And what I'm hearing is that you've been thinking about the book for 20 years, and these change cycles, that's my word I'm using, could take up to 8 years, maybe 12 years.
yes.
And by you consolidating all that learning into a book that is available today, and I will just put it up just one more time so people can see the title if they want to find it, is that you have it's just the enthusiasm and the clarity that as you talk about it, that it's reinforced what you already knew. And it's almost like it's made it, I'm making this up, obviously it's just my interpretation of what I'm hearing you saying, but it's made what you knew visible to you. And therefore now you can, it is really wonderful listening and hearing the energy and the clarity of what you've got to do. And I'm going to have to stop doing these interviews for Karen because I keep buying so many books. I need more time to read. I'm going to have to learn how to speed read a lot faster. She definitely reads faster than I do. It brings me on to the question though, because you've had Karen, as we've already mentioned, challenging you along the way and asking those questions, all important questions. And as you say, hands up, 6 months later, you realised that the title had to change and it was more from that practitioner's perspective. What do you wish that you'd known before you started?
What I wish I knew was how to bring more effectively the imaginative, the creative, the connecting of dots that don't follow a straight line with the data. Because what happened in the earlier parts of writing the book, I was either focusing on the data, I was actively searching for the data, and there's a very particular structured process to find it, validate it, reaffirm it, confirm it in interviews, etc., etc. And there is the parallel but as important process of being imaginative. No worthwhile innovation in whichever field. I mean, this morning I looked into some innovations in the mining industry, one of the oldest industries on the planet. No matter what industry, no matter what your profession is, no valuable innovation ever came to light with a dose of imagination and some real tangible hard data. And the reason for it is that as much as we can imagine what the future could look like, and again, there are proper foresight methods for that. And I think I'm very fortunate together with my team to practice those. That has certainly helped in kind of launching us into the book, because you had to take kind of a future, you had to take a spot in the future, looking at the present, looking at 2024 and say, what will I write then? But equally, you've got to be able to look at the hard data and say, what is it about this pocket of the future that's here? What is it about this version, this scenario of the future that is informative, that is insightful, that the data points to value that can already be unlocked? And if perhaps one of the most surprising outcomes of the book that I find is that there are multiple pockets of the future that are already here. And by being able to practice right from foresight and some of the kind of imaginative techniques that one could bring at the outset of this process, even speculative scenarios, breakthrough type of scenarios, right down to the perhaps what may seem to some the more mundane data trolling that needs to take place to have that hard evidence. Got to bring the two together. And when I brought the two together, the actual act of writing got accelerated. I remember I mentioned to Karen at some point, it used to take me 3 weeks on average to write a chapter. By the time I got to the last few chapters, it was literally 3 days. And for me, it's a combination.
I don't know whether you can break it down and whether it's a question you can answer on the spot, but what worked? What got you from data to imagination? What were the components or the process? What happened?
No, 100%. So look, I think in the act of writing itself, there is a structure to it. And I would certainly recommend, if anyone out there is either already writing a book or considering writing one, or just pondering the thought that they may be an author, my best advice to them is, do get a book mentor. Do get someone who can guide you through the process, because the actual practice of structuring your thinking, and a book is for me almost the epitome of clear thinking. You can get away with one rough idea in writing a blog. You'll get away with it. You might just have a strong opening, a strong closing, and in between the logic might be a little bit fuzzy, but that's okay. People will still read it and might even like your post. When you write a book with multiple chapters, with various sections and major transitions, and in fact, in many ways, various contributors to it, your level of rigor rises up a few notches. And therefore, the requirement of having clear structuring to the book, clear structuring to each chapter, in fact, that's a skill. It can be learned by anyone, but you got to have the right, if I could use an analogy, the right fitness training. You're not going to go to the gym and try the hardest exercise right up front, right? That will get you into the emergency room pretty quickly. I would suggest get a book mentor. Speak to various ones. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. They all have a particular approach that may resonate with you or may not resonate with you. I interviewed, in fact, if I remember correctly, 4 book mentors from 4 different countries in 3 continents before I chose to work with Karen on this book. And I think that's a worthwhile process. Go and do your inquiry. And the same thing I would say with choose the right publisher. Choose someone who can walk that road with you in that last mile, in the editing process, in the publishing, in the marketing of the book. It may seem simple. I mean, Amazon has got a wonderful, front end to upload your manuscript and do the required checks. Don't fall into that overly simplistic approach. Get a human being that actually cares, that actually wants to see your book succeed. A book mentor and publisher alike, and work with them in collaboration, because that's how you together win. That would be my best advice. And that's
Fabulous.
what I found through this process.
And that brings us on to the question that I know that was always reassuring for other authors, but may not be so for you. But what was your lowest point in the book writing journey?
Oh, there were multiple. I guess that the lowest point, I guess over and over again, were those moments where you start questioning yourself, where you start questioning, who are you to pose a new thesis as to how, in my case, ecosystems work, the value in the trillions to the global economy, the transformation of major industries, from mining to energy to banking to digital to wherever we looked, healthcare and otherwise, to even giving any advice to a challenger out there. Who are you to have the audacity of doing that? Someone might look at your book and go, this is complete rubbish. How would you know about my life? And therefore you go through these lows multiple times where you kind of go, who am I to even venture out there? Do I have the title, the degree, the social proof, et cetera, et cetera? Yeah. And what I found is that there are wonderful forums out there with people like me and you who are busy in the act of writing. Writers Hour, for example, is a wonderful initiative started off by a few ladies who, in the midst of COVID, said, we've got to do better. And just by the act of writing, we can connect with each other through this pandemic. Writers Hours continue to this day, and I actively use the forum even when writing short blogs, let alone, and I have a weekly blog, Challenger Moves, that comes out at the beginning of each week. Whether it's that short writing or the act of actually writing a book, you meet some incredible individuals out there. And every time I was on that forum, and I guess in the first 5 minutes, I kind of switched the video off just so no one would see how dreaded I am in the act of writing a book. By the time you get even to the first 15, 20 minutes, you switch on the camera and you see in front of you, and it runs 4 times a day, every day. You see 200 plus individuals at every session writing. They're writing thesis, they're writing books, they're writing incredible pieces of the written word. And that every time certainly gave me the confidence to say, absolutely, there's something that's worth saying here. And then, of course, come the official acknowledgement. You start sharing the draft of the book with other people who you value, who, the foreword to my book was written by Christian Stadler. He's a wonderful individual. And I've got to give a special thanks to him. He kind of ventured forward and said, I'm going to write the foreword to your book. As a fellow strategist, as someone who's steeped in the art of building ecosystems, whether in his academic life or in practice, we share a lot in the kind of ideas behind this book. And when he said, sure, I'll write the foreword to your book, that was in itself an act of a challenger. And I thought he wrote a marvelous foreword to the book. And for me, people like that, and many others who have since endorsed the book, came forward to write a review, just shared with me their thoughts about the book. Even as early as this morning, when the book went live, I got a very warm message on WhatsApp from an ex-colleague who is recently relocated, and is now living by the sea, and I knew that transition was hard for him. He still found in the midst of moving houses, moving over 1,000 miles to a different location, changing major areas of his life, he still found the time to write a warm message. He still found the time to review the book. For me, that talks to the human story that's part of this book. In fact, the book is part of a community that we've established over a year ago. They're called the Challenger CEO community, and I offer an invitation in the summary to the book on the back cover to say, come join us there. That's where challengers challenge together. That's where you can sense check your own ideas, whichever challenge you chose for yourself, or to your words, Sheryl, you're still kind of wondering or thinking about. Join us there. Be part of the conversation, because that's where I see the real shifts taking place. You'll meet some incredible individuals.
I've smiled all the way through this interview. My cheeks are aching as I'm listening to you, but it brings us to the very last question. I'm going to have to give my face a rest, because it's just been in awe of there's going to be another book on the Amazon list today. I can see it. But what's been your biggest success to date as a result of committing to this project of writing this book, or this challenge?
It's a big question, I guess. My biggest success to date is seeing challengers who I've known and I've seen and I've recognized have great ideas, have ways in which they could challenge, whether it's in the immediate environment or a broader forum. Step forward and saying, I just discovered in chapter 3, 4, 6, 8, or 18 of your book what I needed to venture forward, and I've decided to do it. For me, and I've already gotten some really wonderful, kind of affirmations from people who've read the early drafts of the book, who read the final draft, who were developmental editors in this process. That's really heartwarming. That's saying, I saw that. I knew it. When we had that conversation over coffee 3, 4, 5 months ago, I could literally see you doing this. And when they step forward and do it, or recognize even their current work as being the work of a challenger, that for me is really heartwarming. Those are the people, by the way, that we meet or whom we meet in on the Challengers CEO community, who we meet in international conferences. There's a big one happening in China, in fact, in September of this year. In fact, 2 in China that are taking place around that time. And many forums, online forums, where you see those individuals who are now really they've taken on a role which we've come to call, and I see this as one of the most exciting value-adding roles of the 21st century, and that's the role of an ecosystem leader. When they've taken on that step of, in fact, of collective leadership, of leading an ecosystem of contributors in whatever part of the world you're at, in whatever your profession or pursuit in life is, that's really heartwarming. And that is, for me, one day higher education institutions would have a course about ecosystem leadership, about leading an ecosystem of challenges, and that would be just another confirmatory step, I guess, in this transition that's taking place in front of our eyes.
Well, it's great to hear the success so far, but also the success that you're predicting in the future as people recognise the practitioner of the challenger and how they affect and impact on a massive scale, not just financially, but also personally and well-being when they become the challengers of these new ecosystems. So thank you so much, Saar, for joining me today. That brings our interview to a close. So please check out Challengers, How a New Breed of Leaders Collaborates and Wins in a Hyper-Competitive World by Saar Ben Attar. It's been an absolute joy. As I said, my face is aching from smiling so much as you've been telling me all about it. I'm very excited to add that to my reading list and find out more. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Sheryl. It's been a great pleasure. I really enjoyed it. I'm aching a bit as well, but that's
good.
That's
absolutely
such
fabulous.
A good reason. Yeah?
Thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of this show. If you've been listening to Saar and thinking, yeah, my book writing thing is a bit of a challenge, maybe that might be some tips and hints in there for you to read to even get you through the challenge of book writing. Alternatively, reach out and speak to Karen Williams of Librotas. She will challenge you. She will ask you questions, and she is brilliant at creating that structure, which, as Saar has mentioned, can help you then create the environment for that imagination to happen and to be your book writing dreams to become a reality. Thank you again for joining us today.